Just a taste of last year's Pride Parade in Toronto. And this Sunday, the festivities are expected to be bigger, louder, and prouder as the city celebrates World Pride 2014. Tens of thousands are expected to take part again this year. Among them will be a group sometimes called the Invisible Orientation. Asexuals will be marching at least 60 strong this year, fighting for visibility and the right not to be attracted to anyone at all. It'll be the group's strongest showing yet at a Pride Parade, a large feat for a community that's still trying to prove it exists. Historically, asexuality was considered a psychiatric disorder, and to this day, advocates are still fighting to have it recognized as a sexual orientation, not sexual dysfunction. But acceptance has been a tough sell, even in the LGBTQ community. Here's a clip from the 2011 documentary, Asexual.
I'm so worried that people both in and out of the LB, I can never get those, the queer community, might not think we really belong there.
Sex columnist Dan Savage was in that same film. Savage, who identifies as gay, had this to say about asexuals.
As somebody who's pro sort of sexuality, it feels weird to be challenged to embrace a lack of any sexual urge or impulse or desire as a kind of sexuality all by itself.
My next guest says it's crucial for asexuals to be recognized, especially in the LGBTQ community. CJ Chasin was instrumental in organizing asexual representation at the Toronto Pride Parade for the first time in 2010. This year, CJ is marching again and is also one of the organizers of the International Asexuality Conference, which intersects with World Pride this year. CJ Chasin joins me here in Toronto. CJ, welcome to Day 6.
Thank you.
You are taking part in this massive Pride Parade. It's got so much international attention this year in particular. What is it that you are marching for?
Two things, really. The first thing is to show everybody, look, we exist, we're real. And in this year in particular, look how many of us there are.
How many are there?
Well, the only number we really have is about 1% of the population, and it's a somewhat problematic number because it comes from a national study in England, actually, about sexual health practices in the wake of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. But there's a professor at Brock University, Tony Bogart, who did some analysis on that data and found that about 1% of respondents said that they had never experienced sexual attraction to anyone. So many of those people will not necessarily self-identify as asexual or even know that asexuality exists. And there are certainly many people within the asexual community who have experienced some degree of sexual attraction at some point.
Is that how you define it? Someone who has had no sexual desire for either gender? Is that really enough to say that's what makes a person asexual?
That's the definition that we use in the asexual community, that asexual people don't experience sexual attraction, but there's a whole spectrum. So functionally, it's people who experience little or no sexual attraction and or desire for partnered sexual contact.
What kind of discrimination do asexual people face? I mean, and I'm not just talking within, I guess, the relationships that you make, but if you look at the bigger picture in terms of, say, corporation, government, that sort of thing, are you discriminated against in a way that I might not be aware of?
Yes and no. Not explicitly by law, because certainly laws and institutions don't recognize that we exist. At the flip side, they don't recognize that we exist. So, for example, institutions that are based on recognizing relationships through institutions like marriage. Well, if you're in a jurisdiction that recognizes same-sex or same-gender marriage, then that's accessible to people of various different sexual orientations. But if you're an asexual person, and that's not the kind of relationship that you form, then those relationships aren't recognized. Or if they are, inability to have sex is one of the grounds for annulment.
I guess I want to get back to the clips we heard earlier. One was an asexual person saying that they don't feel welcomed by the LGBTQ community. The other one, Dan Savage, saying he's skeptical about the whole idea of asexual rights. Have you shared that experience of that resistance, that skepticism yourself?
Well, certainly, often the first reaction is you should go see a doctor to be cured, even within LGBT communities. And I want to emphasize that this is plural communities. And not too many people stopping to think, well, that used to be what people said about homosexuality. Another thing is a big focus of LGBT communities, especially LGB communities, is on the acceptance of relationships and the people in our lives. And especially for those of us who don't do typical romantic relationships, and even sometimes for those who do, having those relationships recognized and accepted as the same status that other people's relationships are is a huge, huge fight. I have a very accepting family, and even after 10 years, I'm still not there. And they're trying, but they don't really understand.
You hit the nail on the head, though, when you said a lot of people would say homosexuals, lesbians, transgender people have faced institutionalized discrimination. And a lot of them would say that they have fought long and hard for the right to marry, the right to make medical decisions for their partners, things that have been denied to them. What have you been denied?
Most people in Canada, many people, at least the information is out there. No matter what people think about gay or lesbian or bi, they know it's a thing, they know it's a possibility. So we grow up being impossible, the systematic erasure, and trying to sort that out and being read every step along the way very often as gay and lesbian and bi because we're not participating in heterosexuality. So facing the same kind of gender policing bullying, but also a lot of these LGBT communities are certainly willing nominally to accept LGB asexuals, but not wanting to recognize the asexual aspect, trying to deny that, or you're just like us.
So are you gaining ground?
Yes. I think one thing to point out is one of the reasons that we have been trying to approach LGBT communities and T communities as well is because this is really the only place we fit. We are a marginalized sexual orientation group. So there's really nowhere else to go. And these are the groups that have the information about sexual orientation diversity. And they explicitly serve questioning people. People are questioning their sexuality. They're going to go to the local LGBTQ resources because there's nowhere else. And so while initially there was a lot of resistance, and sometimes there still is, there's also been a lot more acceptance, people recognizing, oh, wow, we should have this information. This matters. Oh, I didn't realize we had so many asexual people already in our community doing all of this work, because asexual people have always been part of that struggle.
So are there ways that the traditional gay rights movement is helping your movement?
Well, the traditional gay rights movement, and I think you hit the nail on the head, it's the gay rights movement. It is not the LGBTQ rights movement. Certainly trans people are not typically included in that and often excluded. Often women's issues are not included. Bisexual people are often forgotten about as well. But yes, certainly the visibility and increased acceptance. But there's also the dominant narrative of, look, we're just like everybody else. So the focus on marriage, for example, it doesn't necessarily help open up the field of, look, there are all of these different ways to do relationships that don't meet this hierarchy. And maybe we want to challenge this hierarchy of relationships.
I think there's going to be all kinds of people listening to this conversation we're having, saying they know lots of people who have lived a solitary life or have had friendships, had roommate relationships, non-romantic, non-sexual relationships, variations on those. They've made those choices, or those choices have been made for them in some way. That's just the life they live, that they don't need a definition, that they don't need anyone else looking out for the rights to make the choices that they've made. What do you say to that? Because this is going to be new to a lot of people.
For sure. And individual choices are wonderful things, and people are often able to make them. But there's also a larger societal issue of, are those choices and lifestyles considered legitimate, or are they othered? And do the people who are making them know that there are other people like them, know that that's legitimate, know that there's a possibility for community?
What do you hope to achieve in the coming days from both, I guess, the Pride events, the participation in the parade, from your conference, and I guess from getting your message out?
Well, as I was saying before about marching, to show that we exist to the outside world, also something like a conference and marching in the parade does legitimize us to the outside world. I have people in my life who have had service providers, medical service providers, only believe that they're asexual because they saw us at Pride.
Do you feel welcomed for Sunday's parade?
Yes. The first year I had to write to Pride Toronto to ask, would we be acceptable can we register? Because we're not included in their acronym. If you look at the World Pride acronym, there's a whole list. I didn't bring it, but LGBTQ.
LGBTQ now, yeah.
And they include Two-Spirit, and they include intersex, and they include a number of people. And then they have A at the end. But their A stands for ally. It stands for heterosexual people. It does not stand for asexual.
And you hesitated when I asked if you're going to feel welcome on Sunday. I mean, I know historically it's been an issue. This year, have you made enough headway you're going to feel welcome marching in that parade?
I don't know the kinds of reactions we're going to get from people, because we have people from coming so far who haven't necessarily seen asexual people in the Pride Parade. The negative reactions are often based on misconceptions and ignorance, and we can hopefully clear that up. And I think it's going to be a positive experience.
Well, thank you for coming in and educating me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
CJ Chasin is the founder of ACE Toronto, Toronto's only organization for asexual people. CJ is also one of the organizers of this weekend's International Asexuality.